Arizona Territory, 1877. The desert burned like a furnace, and the wind carried smoke. The stagecoach had caught fire fast, the dry brush licking up the flames and feeding them like it was hungry for destruction. Screaming horses tore loose from their harnesses, and the wheels spun uselessly as the coach leaned into a ditch, half on its side. Inside, Victoria Rosewell clawed at the wooden door, coughing hard from the smoke. Her bonnet had fallen, hair loose and tangled around her face, and she could barely see through the haze. Fire cracked through the canvas roof. Her skirts were catching. She yanked at the latch, but it would not budge. She thought she might die there. Then the door ripped open. A man stood there, his face marked with soot, dark curls stuck to his brow. A revolver was strapped across his chest, bandana around his neck. The wild look in his eyes said outlaw, but his hands were steady as he reached for her. "Come on," he said, voice rough but sure. "You stay here one more second, you burn." She took his hand. He pulled her out just before the flames swallowed the coach whole. He covered her with his coat as they ducked behind a rock outcropping. Her legs gave out, and she hit the ground hard, coughing and choking. "You all right?" he asked, crouching beside her, patting her back as she hacked up smoke. Victoria nodded, but her voice was nearly gone. "I think so. Just shaken." He looked her over, eyes sharp. "Your hair's singed. But you could have died in there." She stared at him. "Who are you?" He sat back on his heels. "Name's Gideon Graves." He paused, then added, "Don't ask what I do for a living. You already know." His revolver. The way he had ridden in from nowhere, without a badge or a uniform. "You're a bandit," she said softly. He did not deny it. Just gave a short nod and looked away. Victoria sat up straighter, brushing ash from her dress. "Well, Gideon Graves, I guess I owe my life to a bandit." He looked back at her then. "Guess you do." They found his horse tied off a ways up the ridge. He helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. She was stiff, trembling, but she leaned back against him anyway. His arm came around her waist, steadying her as they rode. They reached a run-down cabin by nightfall, half hidden in the red rocks. He lit a lantern while she sat on the edge of an old cot, watching him quietly. "You live here?" she asked. "Sometimes. When I need to disappear." He handed her a tin cup of water. "You got people waiting for you?" She hesitated. "No. My father died last year. I was headed to Tucson to take a teaching position." He nodded. "I won't keep you. Just figured you needed somewhere to rest before heading back to town." "I am not going back," she said. "That stage was all I had left. My trunk burned. My letters of reference, my money, everything." Gideon leaned on the table, arms folded. "So what now?" "I do not know," she said honestly. "But I will not cry about it." He watched her for a long moment. Then he said, "You are tougher than you look." Victoria raised her chin. "I had to be." That night, she lay on the cot while he took the floor. The fire cracked low. Outside, coyotes howled far off. She did not sleep. Neither did he. In the quiet, she asked, "Why did you save me?" Gideon did not answer right away. Then he said, "Because someone once left me in a burning house when I was a boy. I swore I would never be that kind of man." She turned her head on the pillow. "That sounds like a broken soul, Mr. Graves." He chuckled dry and low. "Maybe it is." By morning, she had cleaned the blood from a cut on his temple with the last of the water in the basin. He barely flinched as she worked. "You are used to being hurt," she said. He looked at her. "You are used to putting others back together." She tied off the cloth gently, her fingers brushing his jaw. "Maybe we are both used to surviving." He said nothing, but his eyes stayed on her face longer than they needed to. They spent the next few nights in that cabin. Victoria mended what she could his torn shirt, a splinter in his hand, the growing ache in his shoulder from when he had pulled her from the coach. She cooked beans over the fire, and he fixed the door that had been hanging off its hinges. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mesa, he sat beside her on the porch, both of them sipping coffee from dented tin cups. "You should not stay here," he said quietly. "Not with me." "I know," she said. "But I am not afraid of you." "You should be." She looked at him then, long and steady. "You saved me." "I think that is the truest thing a man can do." His jaw tightened. "You do not know what I have done, Victoria." She reached out, her fingers curling lightly around his hand. "Then let me learn." He looked down at their hands, then back at her. Something shifted and his expression softened, just a little. The next day, they rode into a nearby settlement where he sold a silver ring he had stolen years ago. With the money, he bought her a dress and a pair of shoes. "This is too much," she whispered as she held the bundle. "It is not enough," he said. "Not after what you have done for me." "I have not done anything." "Yes," he said. "You have." On the ride back, she asked him, "Why are you really out here hiding?" He hesitated, then said, "My brother was sheriff in Yuma. Got shot during a bank job I was a part of. I did not know he would be there. I never meant to hurt him." Her heart ached at the grief in his voice. "Did he live?" "No." She reached across the saddle and took his hand. He looked down at their joined fingers, then up at her. "You really are not afraid of me, are you?" "No," she said. "I think you are the bravest man I have ever met." His throat worked, like he could not speak, so he just held her hand tighter as the desert wind blew warm around them. That night, they stood outside the cabin, the stars spread wide overhead. He looked at her, and she stepped closer. Neither of them spoke. She placed her palm on his chest, right over his heart. He covered her hand with his, fingers trembling just slightly. Then he kissed her. It was not rushed. Not wild or desperate. Just quiet, sure, like it had been waiting all along. She leaned into him, arms around his neck, and he held her like he would never let go again. They stood like that for a long time, not needing words. Because they both knew. It had already begun. The days grew longer in the dry hush between spring and summer. Wind carried the scent of creosote, and the sky stayed hard and bright until evening, when it softened into blues the color of worn cotton. Victoria stepped barefoot across the packed dirt floor, folding the linen she'd washed in a basin out back. Her hands worked in rhythm, folding, smoothing, setting each piece aside with care. Gideon sat on the edge of the porch, whittling a strip of juniper into something that might one day resemble a spoon. He hadn't said much since they'd returned from the settlement, and something in his silence felt heavier than before. "You don't sleep at night," she said, her voice quiet but certain. He didn't turn. "Too many reasons for that." She came to stand in the doorway, claw still in hand. "I'm not asking you to list them. Didn't figure you were." He shaved another curl from the wood. "But you should know I'm not built for peace." "Then why build a spoon?" His hand stilled. He looked back at her, eyes narrowed not in anger, but in something rougher, unsure. "Guess I wanted to see if I could finish something that wasn't broken to start with." Victoria stepped out and sat beside him. The porch creaked under their weight. She didn't reach for him this time, just let their shoulders touch. "Was your brother older?" she asked. "By 2 years. Isaac." He paused. "He'd hated this place. Said the desert made a man forget his conscience. Maybe it's the only place where a man can find it again." He let out a breath, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "You talk like you've already forgiven me." "I haven't," she said. "I'm just not holding it against you." He turned his face toward hers. "That's the same thing." "No," she answered. "Forgiveness is for the past. I'm watching who you are now." He looked away, jaw tight. "I'm still a man who rode with thieves. And I'm still a woman who stood back while her father drank himself into the grave. Doesn't mean that's all I am." Gideon studied her then, as if she'd shifted shape before his eyes. She didn't flinch from it. "Let him look." Later, as dusk colored the land in rose and rust, Victoria swept the cabin floor with a bundle of sage tied with twine. Gideon leaned in the doorframe, arms crossed. "Do you miss the East?" he asked. "I miss books. And the sound of rain on a roof that doesn't leak." He smiled, faint and real. "I miss music. The kind that comes from a fiddle and not a saloon." She tilted her head. "Then why stay out here?" "Because nowhere else wants me. And I've never been good at asking." Victoria set the sage aside. "You don't have to ask with me." Gideon stepped inside. Shadows moved across his face as the fire caught behind him. "You keep talking like I'm worth saving. You're not a fire I need to put out," she said. "You're a man trying to stand in the ashes." He came closer. His hand brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, slow and uncertain. "I've never met a woman like you," he said. "That's because you've been looking in all the wrong places." His fingers lingered just above her jaw. "You'd stay, wouldn't you? Even knowing everything." She nodded. "I'd stay." He kissed her again, slower this time, like he'd memorized how her breath changed when he touched her, how her hands found his shoulders and held fast, not out of need, but choice. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "You make me want to try." Victoria smiled. "Then try. That's all I ask." They slept in the same bed that night, not from desire, but from something deeper, trust hard-won and quiet. His arm wrapped around her waist as if it belonged there, and she let herself soften into the space they'd made together. In the morning, Victoria woke to the sound of Gideon chopping wood. The pile had nearly tripled. She tied her hair back and walked out barefoot, the light just cracking over the ridge. "You're up early," she said. He wiped sweat from his brow. "Figured I should start pulling weight properly." She handed him a cup of water. "I'll be teaching again soon. There's a schoolhouse in Tubac. The man who runs it said they could use someone willing to teach Spanish and English both." Gideon raised an eyebrow. "You speak Spanish? My mother was from Sonora." He nodded, quiet a moment. "Then I reckon you've got more grit in you than I do." She leaned against the post. "Come with me." "To Tubac?" "Yes. There's land out there. A place we could build something that doesn't have to burn." He looked at her, the sunrise catching in his eyes like gold dust. "You think a place like that exists for men like me?" "I don't think it," she said. "I know it." He dropped the axe, walked to her, took her face in both hands and kissed her like he just found the thing he didn't know he'd been looking for. And this time, when his forehead rested against hers, he said, "Then let's go." The journey to Tubac took 3 days. Victoria rode astride now, in a borrowed pair of trousers that bunched at the waist, and a wide-brimmed straw hat she traded for at a ranch along the Santa Cruz River. Gideon had offered her his saddle, riding bareback alongside her, but she'd refused. She didn't need comfort. She needed balance and both hands free to hold the reins. They rode south, following the river's curve where cottonwoods leaned together like old friends. At dusk, they made camp beneath mesquite trees, the fire low and cautious. Coyotes lingered at a distance. Gideon cleaned his rifle each night, quiet, methodical, while Victoria sorted the dried food into smaller portions, counting every scrap. On the second evening, she watched him as he ran a cloth through the barrel. "Do you ever think of giving it up?" she asked. He didn't look up. "The rifle or the guilt?" "I meant the rifle." He set it aside. "It's not the kind of thing a man puts down unless he's sure he won't need it again." She crouched beside him, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "And are you sure?" He stared into the fire. "No. But I'm willing to take the risk." She reached for his hand. "Then we'll take it together." On the third morning, they came to the edge of Tubac just after sunrise. The town was smaller than Victoria remembered from passing through once before, a few dusty buildings, a blacksmith, a chapel with a crooked bell. The schoolhouse stood at the far edge, whitewashed and worn, its single window cracked across one corner. They dismounted outside the adobe trading post. Gideon tied both horses and glanced at her. Want to go in alone? We're not hiding anything, she said. They stepped through the door together. Inside, the air held the scent of lye soap and dried herbs. A man behind the counter looked up, his eyes flicking between them. He wore a faded vest and had a limp that made his walk uneven as he approached. You're the teacher? He asked Victoria. I am. I heard you were dead. Word was the Tucson stage got hit. It did, she said. I didn't stay dead. The man's brow furrowed, but he nodded. Well, we still got the job. $2 a week and a room in the back of the schoolhouse. You'll teach in both tongues. Some of the children are Yaqui and don't speak much English yet. I'm glad to hear that, she said. He turned his gaze to Gideon. Husband? Not yet, she answered before Gideon could speak. But soon. The man's eyes lingered on Gideon's revolver. We don't get trouble here. We didn't bring any, Gideon said. The man gave a tight nod. Then you're welcome. By noon, they'd settled into the small room behind the schoolhouse. The bed sagged in the middle, and the window stuck when she tried to open it, but there was a table, a basin, and a view of the hills beyond. Gideon stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her run her hand along the cracked plaster wall. Does it suit you? He asked. It does. He stepped inside, setting his saddlebags near the door. I'll find work. There's ranches up north, and a copper mine in Bisbee that always needs hands. She looked at him. You don't have to prove anything to me. I know. But I want to. She crossed the room and laid her hand over his heart. What you want matters now. Not just what you owe. His eyes softened. You make me believe that. That evening, they walked through town together, past rows of ocotillo and the chapel's crooked bell. A woman with a basket of chiltepin peppers called out a greeting in Spanish. Victoria answered with a smile and a wave. Gideon glanced at her. Your mother teach you that? She taught me to listen first. Speak after. That's a skill I never learned. You're learning now. He took her hand. You keep showing me the world's bigger than I thought. They sat on a stone ledge outside the chapel, the air still warm from the afternoon heat. Children's voices echoed from a nearby yard, laughter rising like birds startled into flight. You ever think about it? He asked. Children? She looked at him, surprised but not uncertain. I used to think I wouldn't. Not the way I was raised. But now. Yes. I think I could. He nodded, silent for a moment. Then, I'd like to be better than the men who came before me. You already are, she said. He leaned in, pressing his lips to her temple. Then let's build something that lasts. She turned to him, eyes steady. Let's start tomorrow. They walked home in the dark, fingers intertwined, the path lit by lanterns set low in windows. The sky stretched wide above them, full of quiet and promise. Either of them looked back. By mid-June, the schoolhouse smelled of dust and chalk, the wooden floor worn soft by small feet. Victoria stood at the front of the room, guiding a boy through the shape of a letter, his brow furrowed in concentration. The children spoke in whispers when they didn't think she could hear, some in Spanish, others in hesitant English. She moved between desks with calm patience, her hands never idle, her words always steady. In the afternoons, when lessons ended and the children filtered out into the sun, she stayed behind to scrub the slates and tidy the shelves. That day, Gideon appeared in the doorway, his shirt damp from work and a thin line of copper dust smeared across his forearm. They had me fixing a pulley down in the shaft, he said, stepping inside. Hotter than hell below ground. She straightened from the basin. Are they paying you fairly? They're paying me, he said. That's enough for now. Victoria set the rag aside and crossed to him. I found a spot, she said. North of the river, past the cottonwoods. There's room for a house and a garden. The land's thin, but it'll grow something if we're careful. He slid his hands into his pockets. You thinking of building already? I'm thinking of staying, she said. And staying needs roots. He watched her closely. You sure about this, Victoria? You're already the place I come back to, she said. I just want to build something that can hold us both. Later, they walked to the plot she'd found, the sun low behind them and the smell of sage rising with the heat. The ground was dry but not cracked, a soft slope leading down toward the riverbank. She pointed to a cluster of ironwood trees. There, she said. That's where I'd put the porch. It'll catch the morning light. He knelt beside a patch of bare soil and ran his fingers through it. Needs clearing. I can clear it, she said. He rose and looked at her, his face unreadable. You ever build a house before? No, she said. But I've built a life out of less. That night she stitched a hem by lantern light, while Gideon repaired a cracked stirrup with a length of rawhide. The silence between them was companionable, filled with the creak of wood and the tick of a cooling stove. I saw a rider in town today, he said quietly. Mexican trail hat. Didn't come for trouble, but he looked at me like he knew my face. Victoria didn't pause her stitching. You think he did? Maybe. Maybe not. Some men carry old memories like a debt. If he comes back, we won't be alone, she said. People here know who we are. They know who you are, Gideon said. I'm still a man they tolerate. You're the man they see beside me, she said. That counts. He set the stirrup aside. You ever worry I'll bring danger to your door? She tied off her thread. Danger doesn't scare me. Losing you does. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I can't promise it'll be easy. I don't want easy, she said. I want honest. The next morning, they rode out early, tools strapped to the back of Gideon's horse and a sack of nails tied tight against the saddle horn. They worked side by side, clearing rocks and hauling brush. Victoria's palms blistered before noon, but she didn't stop. Gideon cut fence posts from mesquite trunks and buried them deep into the edge of the plot. By the end of the week, they had a rough outline, a rectangle marked in stone and earth, a single row of boards stacked to begin the frame. Victoria stood in the center, turning slowly to take it in. This'll be ours, she said. Gideon leaned on the shovel. You're not afraid of the work. I'm not afraid of anything that gives me you at the end of it. He crossed the distance between them and took her hand. Then I'd better make sure it's worth what you're giving. She looked up at him. You already have. They kissed once, quiet and sure, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and sun-warmed grass. In the distance, the river sang against its banks, steady as breath. Neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to. The first rain came late that summer, falling hard and quick in the middle of the afternoon. Victoria had just finished laying a row of adobe bricks along the back wall when the clouds broke open above her. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and mesquite, and within minutes the soil turned to mud beneath her boots. She ducked under the half-framed porch roof, watching the water sheet off the edge in silver ribbons. Gideon was still out in the field, pulling a stubborn stump from the ground. He didn't stop when the rain came. He just straightened, wiped his brow with the back of his wrist, and kept digging. By the time he joined her under the cover, his shirt was soaked through, streaked with grit and bark. Victoria handed him a folded cloth from her satchel. He took it wordlessly, drying the back of his neck before draping it over his shoulder. You always work like the sky isn't falling? She asked, arms crossed, shivering despite the heat. He leaned against the beam beside her. It didn't fall. Just opened up some. You could have waited it out. If I waited every time the weather turned, we'd still be talking about building instead of doing it. She glanced out at the field, where the outline of their home was slowly taking form. The roof will need to be thatched before the next one comes. I'll trade for straw this week, he said. There's a man 2 ridges east raising goats. Said he's got more than he can stack. Victoria studied him. His hair clung to his forehead in dark waves, and water dripped from the end of his jaw. But his eyes were steady, watching the house like he could already see it finished. "Does it ever feel like you're getting a second life?" she asked. Gideon didn't answer right away. "Sometimes," he said, "but it's not a new life. Just a better one than I thought I'd be allowed." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. They stood like that until the rain thinned to a mist and the cicadas began to hum again. That evening, they returned to the schoolhouse. Victoria lit a taper while Gideon set the kettle over the fire. The room smelled of damp clothing and rosemary from the satchel she kept near the window. She poured water into the basin and began scrubbing the mud from her arms. "You see that letter from Prescott?" Gideon asked, drying his hands on a cloth. "I haven't opened it yet. It's from the territorial office. Might be important." She dried her arms before unfolding the letter. Her brow furrowed as she read. "They're sending a commissioner next month to evaluate the bilingual program. If it's successful, they'll offer funding to expand it across the territory." Gideon leaned back in his chair. "That's good news." "It's more work," she said. "But it means what we're doing here matters beyond Tubac." He nodded once. "You'll handle it." She folded the letter again. "I want you to meet him with me. Stand beside me when he arrives." "That's your work," he said. "It's our life," she replied. "I want them to see what that looks like." They didn't speak again for a while. The kettle hissed softly. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the sky turned the color of gathered wool. Later, as they lay beneath the thin quilt, Gideon turned toward her in the dark. "I've been thinking," he said. She brushed her fingers along his collarbone. "About what?" "About marrying you before the house is finished." Victoria smiled into the space between them. "You've been thinking slow. I didn't want to assume. I didn't say no." He shifted closer, his voice low. "Then I'm asking. Not because it's expected, but because I want to build everything with you. From the ground up." Victoria pressed her hand to his chest. "Yes." They married 2 weeks later, in the chapel with the crooked bell. The priest was half blind and spoke more Spanish than English, but Victoria understood every word. Gideon wore a clean shirt and a vest she'd sewn from old canvas. She wore her mother's earrings, the ones she'd carried tucked in the lining of her reticule since the day she left New York. There were no flowers, but the chapel doors were open, and the scent of sun-warmed stone and sage filled the room. A few townsfolk came, her pupils' mothers, a rancher who'd lent them his cart, the blacksmith who'd sharpened Gideon's tools for the build. No one mentioned Gideon's past. No one needed to. When the vows were spoken, and the priest nodded his blessing, Gideon took Victoria's hand like he meant to never let it go. And he didn't. By autumn, the house stood whole. The roof thatched, the porch shaded in the morning, just as she'd planned. Inside, the walls were whitewashed and clean, the hearth built from river stones they'd hauled together. There was a table he made with his own hands and shelves lined with the books she'd gathered through years of moving and saving. They planted corn and beans along the slope, and Gideon built a coop from scrap wood for the hens a neighbor gifted them. On Sundays, Victoria read aloud from worn paperbacks while Gideon carved small wooden animals for the schoolchildren. The house echoed with quiet, not emptiness. One evening, she stood at the edge of the porch, watching the sun fold into the horizon. Gideon came up behind her and placed a hand gently on her stomach. "You sure?" he asked. She turned to him, her eyes bright in the fading light. "I'm sure." He nodded once, the weight of it settling into his shoulders not with fear, but with a kind of reverence. "I'll build a cradle," he said. "You'll make it strong," she said. "I'll make it beautiful." And he did. They lived there, in that house of their own making, for many years. Gideon never went back to the life behind him. He didn't have to. The town came to see him not as a man with a past, but a man of quiet steadiness and earned trust. Victoria taught generations of children, her voice shaping words into possibility. Their son was born in the spring, when the ocotillo bloomed red against the hills. They named him Isaac, not out of sorrow, but remembrance, the kind that honored what came before without letting it define what came next. And each night, as the air cooled and the stars blinked into being over the desert, Gideon held Victoria's hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Because by then it was.